Continuing on with nutritional issues, we're looking at health and diseases. And this is a part 1 of 2 in this video. We're looking at a couple different diseases in this case, as well as some allergies and what they're looking at and how they work. We start looking at health and diseases. Sometimes it's simply an unbalanced diet. Sometimes it's more along the lines of figuring out what works for your body and what doesn't. Because unbalanced for your body could lead to problems, diseases, upset problems with your GI tract, and various other issues. But what works for one person might not be the same for somebody else. So let's start with gastroesophageal reflux disease, or known as GERD. Now, this really is a persistent form of acid reflux. Now, acid reflux, what that is your stomach has hydrochloric acid in there. Helps the digestive process. But if that hydrochloric acid works its way up into the esophagus, you get burning. That's referred to as heartburn or acid reflux. Now, a lot of times GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease, is more prevalent in those who are obese. Now, this has been based on a couple different studies on looking at obesity compared to rates of GERD. The most common symptoms is heartburn. Now, obviously, heartburn isn't horrible, but it's not pleasant. But there can be other symptoms that go along with this and can become quite problematic. Because beyond that heartburn, there also can be regurgitation. So actually food coming back up. There can be trouble swallowing. So you're having a hard time even eating food, as well as persistent coughing. Now, while those might not sound horrible, if you're trying to eat and you keep having a problem swallowing and you just can't eat, that could lead to nutritional deficiencies. So they could become quite problematic. Now, a lot of times this is due to the esophageal sphincter not functioning properly. Between your esophagus and your stomach, there's a sphincter, a muscle, that closes and opens. As you swallow, it opens to allow food through and closes to prevent food from coming back up. If this sphincter, this esophageal sphincter, is not working properly and it's opening when it shouldn't, allowing the contents of the stomach to come back up, that is potentially acid reflux. Now, it's not the only possibility. They're also exploring the possibility of weight playing a part. By having excess weight constantly compressing on the stomach, forcing the contents back up as well. Alcohol and caffeine, they've found, can a lot of times worsen the problems with GERD, or the gastroesophageal reflux disease. So trying to limit alcohol consumption and limit caffeine intake can help to limit the effects and the impacts of GERD. Treatments typically start with an alteration in diet and lifestyle changes. So they start with reducing weight, smaller meals, trying to avoid trigger foods. Now, you're saying, well, how do you know what trigger foods are? Well, if you're eating something and all of a sudden afterwards you have heartburn, that's a trigger food. So you're keeping track of what causes the problems and then trying to steer clear of those problems. That's why it's a lifestyle and diet change. You're changing what you eat, hopefully also reducing weight sometimes to help out with that aspect. Now, a secondary way they might try to look into medication, but that's not the preferred method. First of all, trying the diet and lifestyle. But if everything else fails, then you can even move into potentially surgery. The surgery would be looking at the esophageal sphincter, trying to strengthen it so it stays closed and doesn't open up as easily. So that's gastroesophageal reflux disease, known as GERD. Next up is Irritable Bowel Syndrome, or IBS. In the case of Irritable Bowel Syndrome, you have muscle spasms along the colon, or large intestines. This can lead to abdominal pain, can lead to bloating, constipation, or even diarrhea. You're saying, hold on, constipation, diarrhea, two complete opposites. True, depends how the spasms are occurring. If the spasms are all in one place, it could prevent things from passing through, creating constipation. If the spasms are all over, it could be pushing things through quicker than normal, leading to diarrhea. So hence the variability there, depending on what's going on. There really are two main factors here for this disorder, looking at an unbalanced diet and stress. Unbalanced diet, not the right nutrients, a lot of times large meals, high-fat meals, added sugar foods, wheat or even rye sometimes could be the triggers. So look at the balancing of a diet to make sure you're having the proper amounts and the healthy aspects of things, or knowing what might be a trigger for your particular case. Stress, well, you can't get away from that one. Everyone has stress. It's one of those things we learn to deal with. But sometimes too much stress can just trigger the entire GI system to be out of whack, causing it to just be irritated and passing things through quicker or not quick enough, causing these symptoms as well. Caffeine and alcohol as well can also be a problem to make things worse. So same thing as GERD, IBS can also be triggered by caffeine and alcohol. Same treatment here, we're looking at lifestyle and diet changes to start with. Hopefully that can help to alleviate any problems by maybe keeping a journal, figuring out what is going to be the triggers for the symptoms here. Eating slower. In today's society, a lot of times meals are very quick. Grab something on the go, grab a 5-minute meal, hurry up, go. Well, sometimes taking a step back, slowing down, allowing your digestive system to work through what you eat and tell you when you're full can help alleviate some problems as well. And hydration, making sure you get plenty of water. Now, that's not saying drink a ton of soda or pop or whatever you want to call it, but water helps out with making sure there's enough moisture in the food you're eating, making sure your entire GI tract has enough liquid going through it. Medication can be a second option if any of those other ones don't work. So if the eating slower, the water, journal for triggers, none of that works, then medication gets kicked in. But just like gastroesophageal reflux, irritable bowel syndrome is also trying to be a diet and lifestyle change. All right, third one up, looking into celiac disease. Now, celiac disease we mentioned in a previous video a little bit, but this will get into a little more detail of what it actually is and how it's working. Celiac disease is actually an autoimmune disorder. What's occurring is there's abnormal immune reaction of your small intestine cells. They're reacting to gluten. So the gluten is causing this unusual immune reaction in your small intestines. Now, gluten itself is forming from glutenin and glutein. Those two components are found in wheat, rye, and barley typically. And that's why a lot of times wheat, a lot of times the flour we're looking at, is something that triggers celiac disease. So what actually happens in this case is the yeast that's used a lot of times in breads or doughs is going to produce carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is produced because the yeast eat the flour. Well, it gives that bread that airiness, that kind of space in there to collects. But kneading that dough and mixing this all together then ends up creating gluten. So you're taking those components and mixing them with the carbon dioxide, with the yeast, and everything ends up producing gluten, which is the problem. Now, things like corn or buckwheat or oats are typically safe. They don't contain the components to make gluten. But that doesn't mean they're 100% safe. I said typically. Because unfortunately, a lot of those components, corn, buckwheat, oats, are processed in facilities that also process wheat or rye or barley. So therefore, some cross-contamination can occur, and even a little bit could unfortunately trigger someone with celiac disease. So it's important to know if the facilities are shared facilities or if they're dedicated to certain processing. Symptoms can go from mild to severe. They can be things from abdominal pain to a little bit of weight loss occurring, to this pale, fatty, loose stools that are coming out, and can start anytime from infancy right into later in life. There's no one point it has to start at this age. It's all based on when the body starts to produce these antibodies, the antibodies against gluten. If it happens during infancy, very early on, but it can happen anytime later. It's when those antibodies attack gluten and the cells that line these small intestines, they become destroyed, they become damaged. The villi that increases the surface area of the small intestines, helps with absorption, they become damaged. Enough damage here become very problematic. But the good thing is, once you're diagnosed and go gluten-free, therefore you're not producing the antibodies anymore, once you're gluten-free, then those small intestine cells, they can heal up in under 6 months. So as long as it wasn't severe damage that was permanent, the body can heal itself and get right back to normal. All right, last one for this video is food allergies. Now you're saying, well, food allergies, that's kind of different. True. But food allergies is a whole range of things, but it's still dietary based. Really, food allergies are looking at how the body reacts to different components in foods. Now, all food allergies are going to be different from person to person. And allergies are actually different than sensitivities. Allergies are defined as when you actually have an immune response where the body makes IgE antibodies. That means that the body is making an immune response to whatever was ingested. And by doing that, those antibodies are going to attack the food. Now, typically it's the protein portion of the food, but can be anything in the food. It's that attacking that can cause quite a few different problems. So the way that you a lot of times first trying to diagnose are these skin prick tests. You'll try to prick a little bit of the skin and introduce whatever the allergen you think is at that point. Now, they're good for an initial screening, but they're not really 100% positive because a lot of false positives occur. Really, the best method is the double-blind placebo-controlled food challenge. That's a mouthful, but what it basically means is you're going to eat the food they think you're allergic to and then see what happens. You're saying, well, hold on. Some people can go into anaphylactic shock for this. Very true. Which means you have to kind of gauge what level of a response the body makes. And also, make sure you're in a controlled medical environment. It should only be done under medical supervision. So yes, it's more accurate, but you gotta make sure you do it under doctor's control. Because symptoms can be from mild to very severe, as in life-threatening from allergies. Could be things along the line of hives. Yeah, they're inconvenient, but not life-threatening. Stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, swelling of a tongue. The throat could swell up. Could go into anaphylactic shock in some cases. So for some individuals, it's very important to know exactly what the allergy is and then potentially have a medical countermeasure for it. That's why some individuals carry EpiPens to try and slow down the allergic response to whatever occurred. Now, these allergies, unfortunately, don't have any clear one treatment fits all. Sometimes it could be simply just avoid the food. Sometimes it could be a tolerance building aspect, where there are certain studies now that are coming out where individuals that are very allergic to peanut butter or peanuts, for example, where they go into almost anaphylactic shock if they have an exposure, where they start with a very small amount in a controlled environment, and then over time keep building up those amounts until eventually they don't have any response. Now, this is still an ongoing research. It's not something that's been 100% proven, but some individuals are having great results there. Again, all depends on how the person responds and how the treatment works. But really, a majority of these food allergies, like 90% or so, are coming from milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, and soy. Those really are the 8 main things that comprise a majority of all food allergies. So the trick is to figure out what the allergy is towards, if it's an allergy or a sensitivity, and then once you figure it out, how to modify your diet to avoid that food allergy. So a couple different health and disease concerns here. Some more come up in part 2. Until the next video.